Hello everyone and welcome to the Queerness Diaries with my special guest that wants to be the centre of attention. So Greta, is this your podcast? Well, she's welcome to join whenever she wants. So the Queerness Diaries, I'm so excited to have it out there into the universe, but someone else isn't. The authenticity of this podcast is that we can make as many mistakes with our speech or things going disruptive as possible, because it's really a story of why I'm doing it. I wanted to make a podcast focusing on mental health, the queer community, and I have always kept a diary in some form. Ever since I was a little kid, and ever since I can remember, I'm showing my age now, but I remember having a typewriter. I used to make notes about my day. I used to have, remember those little cameras where you could print out the pictures? I used to document life through that. VHS, we used to do like family videos. We're always documenting, and I became very invested in documenting my life. And as I got older, obviously, as times moved, the way we associate with technology changed. And so I always kept this private diary. And so, me, of course, my name's Connor. I'm gay. I have ADHD. And as I started to come to these realizations, I definitely did not want anyone finding my diaries and the things I was writing about, because I pretty much did it every day. It was always a hobby of mine, and it evolved with social media into maybe projecting sometimes a version to the world through videos and reels and things, how it is nowadays on Instagram, that maybe present a specific part of my life, but I've still continued to maintain this diary. It's been very important for my healing journey, because today I'm going to tell you my story. The other podcasts are going to focus on other people's stories. And so really today, through my story, it's my diary out into the world for the first time. And that's the point of the podcast. The success is not about the numbers, it's not about how many people view. It's about getting people on and talking about mental health in a raw and authentic way, where people feel like it's a safe space that they can open up about their stories, their journeys, their diary, their queerness diary. And the importance of that is, for me, so much more than any views. I think having this podcast is kind of something that's needed in the queer community, a kind of safe space to just openly have the conversations that maybe with our friends, family, therapists even, are not always easy to have. Because I know myself personally, sometimes I feel like they just don't get it, or I'm bothering them, or I can't tell them this, or I have to hold back. So every week will be a different guest coming on, and they will talk about their story. Some of them I can definitely relate to, and others, just have stories to tell. Every episode will be different, and no topic is off limits. And I really invite people from all over the queer community to join in, and let's get the conversations going and get our diaries out there. And I think it's a big release as well. Today for me, for example, is going to be a big release to tell my full story, my diary, for the first time. I'm a little bit nervous about it, but I'm just going to go from the beginning. So I should take a glass of water, because it's a flipping long story. I'm going to try not to curse as well, because I don't want to be bleeped out, but Guests, feel free to curse as much as you want. Whatever makes you you is important for the podcast. So, my story. I'm Connor. I grew up in a small town in England. The name is Telford, and it's a town which I call the middle of nowhere because there's more sheep than people. It's kind of, if you imagine, between Birmingham, Manchester, Cheshire, that area of the UK. So I was growing up in a small town with a family of me, mom, dad, sister. But we'll put dad to the back because there's going to be a reason why he's at the back in the story. So, growing up in this family, from a young age, I knew something wasn't quite right about me, something off, because I was sort of, I felt different and very socially awkward around everybody. And my memories as a kid are, my father trying to get me into Aikido, taking me to Aikido lessons. My mother would take me to hypnotists to try and fix me. What's the problem? I go to different doctors. Is he autistic? Is it this? Is it that? So in my head, all this time that I was being sort of studied, I was feeling like from a young age something was wrong with me. And you can imagine as I started to get older, that only got worse because as a young kid, I used to get bullied a lot for being weird and socially awkward. Like, I have memories of being locked in a shed by a group of people that were supposed to be my friends and they wouldn't let me out. I narrowly escaped a pedophile in the local neighborhood that used to basically stalk and watch me and my friends as a group. And these things impact your life a lot later, I realize. And so I started to become withdrawn and not want to go out. Became very invested in The Sims and The Sims 2, Roller Coaster Tycoon, my Xbox, Game Boys, Pokemon cards, all these things, like everything I could do to be inside and not be out and about because I had the fear of this pedophile. Also had the fear of if I told my family that my dad was going to possibly end up in prison, the things he would have done. So it's something that I actually buried and forgot about, and it didn't resurface the memory for many, many years. I don't want to go into the full story of it today because there's so many other things to cover in a short time. So you can imagine from the age of 8 to 11 that I sort of transitioned into being more antisocial. Before that, I'd been socially awkward but forced into social situations. I kind of became more withdrawn. And then secondary school, high school, so my teens. This is when I realized I was gay, and I knew it. I knew I wasn't bi. I knew it was not a phase. I was attracted to a PE teacher at school, and at the age of like 11, 12, when figuring out your gayness, it's like, oh, it became my biggest crush. I'm not going to say his name, but he was a very handsome PE teacher. And yeah, that was my highlight of the school day when we had PE lessons. And at home, I had to hide it because it was around a homophobic father. And not only homophobic, there were other things about him. He was aggressive and violent, physically and mentally, not just to my mother, but also to me. And so I always had this fear of him from a young age. And also, there would be times, from the age of 12, I was doing, like delivering the newspapers, basically. And he would basically sit in the car and follow me and watch me and comment on my posture, the way I walked. You're walking too much like a girl, or a puff, he would call it, which is a slang derogatory term for being gay. Comments like that constantly, and the Aikido had also been to make me more macho, which displayed later in my life in having issues with toxic masculinity, I realized, and also my anger towards him was growing because we were in a very abusive household. He was very abusive towards my mother. He'd hide microphones in the house and try and record her conversations because he was always suspicious because he'd had an affair himself when my sister was born. And so he was always paranoid that my mother was going to leave him for someone better. I wish she had done many, many years ago. But we'll get to a later part of the story where big irony unfolds later on. And so my teen years, yeah, I would say that they were awkward because I was out of place in secondary school. I'd sort of withdrawn from everybody. I was super shy, very awkward, and I didn't know that I had ADHD, but they'd show up in different ways. So I was very drawn into danger. I was obsessed with horror movies, scary movies. I was obsessed with exploring abandoned houses, urban exploration. I was anything that would be risky or put me in some sort of danger, sort of gave me a dopamine boost that I naturally wouldn't get, because in school I was suppressing myself all day, trying to get top grades and also being silent and quiet with not many friends. And so it was like after school, you know, I put myself in some risky situations. I used to be obsessed with, you know, I wanted to become a weatherman and go chase tornadoes in America, for example, one week, or the week after. I'd be like, oh, what would it be like to be in the eye of a hurricane? You know, all these things with ADHD that go through your head as a teenager, and also having to conceal my sexuality and hear comments anytime someone from like the media, someone gay was on TV, my dad making derogatory comments about them was like, this can never come out about me, because also in school, someone did get found out for being gay and they got bullied and absolutely relentlessly harassed. So I'm talking like baseballs would be thrown at them when they're walking, everyone would mock them. They really received so much nasty hate, and I at the time was so terrified of being found out that, you know, if someone even suspected I was gay, I would shut it down so fast. And it was like a daily thing, like for especially around 15, 16, just before leaving school and going to college, this fear of being outed and my life falling apart, I thought, if I got outed. But something changed within me when I went to college. I sort of developed this slightly rebellious attitude because I'd grown tiresome of my dad's repetitive sort of, I was going to swear then, CUNTY-ness. And I sort of got really tired of how he was treating my mother and the fact that I couldn't be myself. And suddenly I was in a college where there were a lot of people. There was someone, even young age, like happily, openly saying, I am trans at 16. And I was around a lot of people who were openly gay or lesbian. My best friend was a lesbian, and I felt this freedom outside of the home, and I started to want to explore and started to talk to guys more on the internet and started to really, you know, explore my sexuality more. But when I came out, it obviously did not go well. It was back in the days of, before the smartphone, just before the smartphone. So I'm 32, I'm about to turn 33 soon. But so I ran away from home basically and sent this message to my mom, and I stayed at my best friend's house. And when I went back home, it was not, what I would have loved, obviously, at the time was the family to hug me with open arms and say, "We love you no matter what." But as many of us know, when we reveal our queer identity, we're often not met with that response. So mine was met with rejection, with hate and control. And so for my mom, she'd newly become a Christian. She couldn't wrap her head around it. She did not understand it. It was kind of, I guess, like a loss for her at the time. I guess feeling like she'd lost, a side of me that she was expecting, that I would grow up and have a family and all this stuff and go in everything against her religion. But, she got on a path, which I'll get to later. My sister, she was 4 years younger than me at the time. She didn't really know. They kind of kept her out of the loop until a bit later on. And my father, well, he went pretty nasty. So he started smoking again, said it was because of me. He went through my MySpace and MSN, so that's really showing. Like, he went through all the conversations, blocked every single guy. He cut my internet off at 10 p.m. every night, and he literally screamed, "You're not gay, it's just a phase," and all these different insults at me as I cried on the bathroom floor. And he basically said, "Yeah, I'm going to control your life. Like, we're not having this phase. I would have known if you were gay. Like, it's something, you're not gay." He was like putting that onto me, and the control was relentless. So I remember December 2007 very well. Relentless. It was just every single day, just the most horrible feeling, like arriving home and trying to do college work, but turning around and is in the doorway. So you get this fear, because I already had subconsciously, which I'd buried, this fear of people like walking behind me from the pedophile I'd escaped when I was a kid. But now, like, I instinctively, if I turned around, I'd close the tab or something on my computer, because I was still trying to sneakily talk to guys or whatever. And so one time, he was stood there and he was like, you should have seen his face. I still can picture it to this day. He went crazy and started screaming and going really off the rails, angry at me. And he was like, "You're talking to guys again, aren't you? You are talking to those pedophiles online," because that's what he would call them. You're actually legal at 16 in the UK. But to him, he was like associating, me talking with other 16, 17-year-old guys, calling them every single insult he could. So it escalated downstairs. It became a physical fight between me and my father. My mom was there on the sofa, we woke her up with the argument. I remember that feeling like she tried to stop it, but she wasn't there for me in the moment. And after that, I was done with my dad. I had to pretend, because what else was I going to do? Be stuck on the street at 16, 17 and have no place to live, with no money? Like, what was I going to do realistically? So I buried it, and we never spoke about it. It just became a silence in the family, but my anger towards my dad would come out in other ways, and also my mom in other ways. So I became a rebellious teenager. I got a piercing. Um, I started to, drink a lot and go to these parties and get absolutely wasted with my friends at college, go on these camping trips. And as soon as I turned 18, of course, I remember my first gay experience. Well, if ever you've been to London, you know the sticky dance floors of heaven. That was like my first night of liberation. Like the first time, like I was really out in public, and I'd lied obviously to my parents saying I was going to a friend's house party. So I snuck down on the train, went for a night out in heaven, and it was, to me, the first authentic like night I had of being me. And I remember I cried on the train home. I don't know if it was the hangover, if it was the Kelly Clarkson album at the time, or just the combination of all of that and just being able to be myself. And then I had to really cherish any moment that I could get that, because it was really, I don't know, really difficult at the time to just get a moment of just being able to be myself and not have to hide. And so it was difficult. It was like only in moments could I get a bit of happiness and myself. And yeah, sorry, it was just something that was really hard to navigate, because I felt like at home, it had just been buried and I could never speak about it again. And I had to find an escape plan. And then it's like, I did my studies and I had, these glimpses into the gay world. But until I moved to Madrid, I never got to be the full version of me. And so how that happened was I was kind of stuck, after my studies, still in my town, working in a homophobic workplace, also, by the way, which was not fun. So, not only at home, but at work, there were people who were gay, but, the friends I had at work would make comments about them, and I had so much fear. There was just so much fear for being myself, because my mom was still in this relationship, and things hadn't gone well for me with the career path I wanted as a music producer. Um, so eventually I decided, after a trip to Madrid, which was so liberating, and seeing the gay community there and how open everything was, that literally I got a job a few weeks after the holiday, packed my suitcases, left the UK, and never looked back, and moved to Spain. So suddenly I arrived to Madrid and everything's so open and everything's there. But I'd been in this place of, almost 9 years since I'd come out, where I had kind of lost my self-identity, and I was now in my own apartment, like managing everything all on my own, for the first time. And I didn't know anyone really when I arrived, so I sort of found my way. I also decided I was going to be completely myself, and with my ADHD and any other parts of my personality that came out, whether people knew it or not. Like, I was just 100% me, and through that I met a really great group of friends. It's my fondest time of memories from that era around 2017. I have so many good memories, and when I look at the videos and, the diary from back then, there's just so much joy, like being able to go out into queer spaces and just be my absolute self, and being able to date and being able to just have fully organic, open conversations with my friends. And I would be a hot mess a lot of the time because, I'd grown up with social anxiety, and my crutch was to drink a lot to be more confident, because I didn't have a lot of confidence after years of my self-worth being taken away. And yeah, but one thing is, I went to Madrid with the mentality, I'm gonna meet Prince Charming, I'm gonna meet the love of my life here, like this is my gay escape, I'm gonna get the romance story. And it hadn't happened after a year. So I was depressed. I was feeling really sad. I was feeling really rejected. I was analyzing everything about my appearance, from my teeth to my hairline receding, to not being buff enough, to only being a shorty. Cheers to the shorties, 170 centimeters here. And yeah, it really started to affect me. And then it's like someone dropped from the sky out of the blue. I met my first boyfriend shortly after that, but I was in a depressed place where I was just really wanting to be in a relationship. And so when I met my ex, I wasn't going into it like emotionally fully great from the beginning, because I hadn't worked on any of my issues. So, I knew that I had a lot of problems. My problems at the time were my insecurities with my body dysmorphia, also my sort of jumpiness, um, with, for example, like anyone like looking at my phone or computer, or anyone feeling like anyone was following me or something like that, was really triggering for me. And so there were red flags from the beginning of dating this guy. 2 weeks after we met, um, he was already angry because, for example, I had gone out with my friends to a party we always went out to, but I was like this, in a tank top. And so when I sent him a picture, he got really angry, really, really. And also, he was still on Grindr at the time. That same weekend, he invited me to meet his friends at a party. And because one of his friends had seen me on Grindr, um, it ended up in an argument. But I was like, you're still on there too. Like, I don't get it. We're not even dating yet. The relationship, as we went into it, there were great qualities about him, and there were things that, were red flags. And I just went in regardless, all in. And it was unfair on the both of us, because really, even though I was 26 by then, I wasn't ready for a relationship, clearly, because I hadn't done the work on myself to be confident. And so I lost myself even more in the relationship. And so he had an issue with control and jealousy. I remember specifically, like, I used to really get jumpy because he didn't trust me. I used to, and I still do, when I'm stressed, I get like a cold sore herpes above the lip. And anytime I got one, you're a cheat, you're a whore, you're a liar, you're out meeting other guys, you're doing this to me, that's disgusting. All these horrible things that shattered my self-confidence even more. And I also had him really hate my friends. And I really, he, I'm adamant that he was like, these people are disgusting and they're not right for you. And it became difficult to blend the two worlds. So I started to become isolated to try and please him, but he was never pleased. He was always jealous. If we go on nights out and someone that I'd even spoke to a year before said, hey, who's that? How do you know him? Why is he coming up to you? Like, have you hooked up with him before? Have you had sex with him? Like, oh, so many relentless questions. And it just got to the point where I became like a homebody that just didn't want to go anywhere. And there was a particular altercation when we went to a theme park with him and his sister, where, I was jumpy with my phone. I was trying to just take a picture before we went on the roller coaster. And instinctively, when he turned around, like I was sending the picture to my mom, but a message popped up from my friend, and I'd said something not so nice about my ex to my friend that day. So I quickly hid the phone away. And from then, I could tell he was in a bad mood all day. We ended up in a huge argument where he's like, "You're hiding everything from me in this phone and you're a cheat and all these things." That day, I should have been done with the relationship, because what I did instead, I turned notifications off on WhatsApp and kept my phone on silent and sort of hid my life. I isolated myself pretty much from everyone for the rest of that year and became deeply depressed in the relationship, very unhappy. But I put on a smiley face because that's what teachers do in the classroom, and that's what I was working as over there, and pretended everything was all good, but it wasn't. I was so miserable in that relationship, and I lost every spark and bit of joy that I'd had before the relationship, that I didn't realize that I had in not having a relationship. I felt like I needed a relationship to give me the joy, to give me the missing things. But the missing things were the things that were space that I needed to fill my life with instead of trying to find a boyfriend and other things. And also trying to resolve my past issues. And so, the memories came back during the relationship of the pedophile, and that's why I'd be so jumpy. And the situation just got worse, like in this relationship. And then suddenly my mom calls me, "Your dad has gone to Thailand." And his phone was off. It basically disappeared for 3 weeks. So I went home and investigated. Found out that he was having an affair with like 17 different women. All the different messages, the same way he had stalked and harassed me, like through, he taught me well because I got into his accounts allegedly. Okay, I'm going to use that word just to protect myself. And I got into everything of his, all his dating profiles, all his things allegedly. And I managed to uncover his whole secret life that he had going on outside the family, all these different things that we did not know about him. And that broke my mother completely, because they'd already not been speaking for months, and me and him had no relationship. There was nothing to lose for me. When I moved to Madrid, we'd maybe send one message a month, and that was it. Him and my sister had a much closer relationship. He'd flown out to Greece to see us. She was working, as a travel like agent abroad in hotels, and but he never went to see me, and I was happy for it because I did not want that in my safe space city, you know. So yeah, it just became worse and worse because when he came back, it became very vicious between my parents, and I was back in Madrid. I had to go back to work, and so he'd do things like throw my mom out the house, change the locks when she was at work, and she ended up, having to live with my grandma, and it was just this back and forth, back and forth. There was no accountability, no apology, no remorse. And also, I was feeling angry at my mom for staying with him, but also that she could have left years ago, and that she should have left either when my sister had been born and he'd had that affair, or when I'd come out and he'd attacked me in front of her in the living room. But only now she was wanting to get out of the divorce. Had a lot of anger. I had a lot of anger towards my dad, which I unleashed in a message. I unleashed my final coming out message to the three of them, my mom, dad, and sister. My mom and sister were incredibly loving and supportive, and from then onwards, it's been an upward trajectory with them because they lovingly embraced me and accepted me. With my dad, I was like, he was like, let's have a conversation man to man. I was like, these type of terms, man to man, are not going to work with me. You've never saw me as the person. You've always tried to project this toxic masculinity image onto me. I'm not having it. And you're a scumbag that's actually done something bad, having an affair with multiple women in Thailand and all over the world, who God knows how many other people you've been doing it with, behind our backs, disappearing for 3 weeks, phone off, no contact. You could have been dead if I hadn't found out, allegedly, what you were up to the whole time. And you want to have a conversation man to man. I think the ship has sailed. So good luck with your deck of cards. Bye. And basically that was it. I was done, but obviously they were stuck in this divorce battle, so I had to intermediate some communication, even though I wanted nothing to do with that person. That person is not my dad. Like, at this point, I let go in 2018 of him being my father, but there was a lot of residual anger, of course. But I started to claim my life back then because my mom and sister came to visit me and my boyfriend, and it was like their way of showing their acceptance. And that was a big moment for me. And even though I was unhappy in the relationship, it showed that they had worked on accepting me. And so I forgave my mom in that moment, and all the anger, I felt it was released. And my sister, I always knew that she'd known, we just never had the conversation. So it was like, it's all out there now, but I gotta get out this relationship. I'm not happy. And oh God, he proposed just on New Year's Eve going into 2019 in London. When the fireworks were going off, he dropped to his knee and proposed. And 2 days before, I'd been telling my friends I'm a coward because I'm such a people pleaser and I don't know what to do, but I want to be out this relationship. I'm so unhappy. I'm miserable. My only joy had been going home for Christmas and seeing my friends back in the UK, and my mom, sister, and my grandma. It was like the first tiny bit of joy. And then he was coming to London, and I remember being on the train dreading it, like, I have to see him again. I shouldn't be dreading seeing my boyfriend. And then he proposes to me, and I say yes because I'm in front of a group of everyone, like in London on that hill. I forgot what it's called. Is it Hampstead Heath or whatever? Like, everyone looking. So obviously I said yes, but then retracted it the next day because I did not want to get married. I wanted to be out the relationship. And so naturally the relationship took a downward curve, and by April we were broken up. But in that time I started to claim my life back. I started to try and rebuild with my friends, start to do the things I wanted to do. If I wanted to go on a hike, I would go on a hike. I didn't have to spend it with his family and feel the obligation. If I wanted to go out with my friends, I would go out with them. I didn't want to go out with him, with them, and have a problem. And I didn't want to go out with him and his friends and have a problem. I wanted to start to do these things independently. And when you realize you start wanting to do everything independently of your partner, you realize you probably shouldn't be in a relationship. But I was just so wanting him to be the one to break up with me that I just started not being so, I guess, nice, and just doing less and less. Like, anything would irritate me. Like, the fact that I used to make him lunch, that became something that I really hated to do and stopped. Um, it sounds terrible, but the thought of him like touching me, hugging me, kissing me started to really gross me out. So anything I could do to just avoid it. But we were living in the same apartment, my studio apartment, with not much space. There's nowhere to go if we had an argument other than me to leave. And, my natural response in an argument was to leave. And so we had, I think, two breakups before the actual breakup. And then finally, the final breakup was because he insisted, after being very mean to me all week while he was sick and insulting my apartment and how it was, just being nasty all week. Magically, he was better on the Friday for my friend's birthday, and I said, I don't want you to come. And it escalated to the point where we broke up. I was like, I'm so done. I was done months ago in my head, but finally I had the courage, but not the courage to deal with the aftermath. So, of course, I ran away to my friends for a few days after the birthday party. And May 2019 was a hell of an awkward month because I gave him a month to leave and he was grieving the relationship. I wasn't. I was blooming. I was happy. I was done. I was living my best single life and doing whatever I wanted, and I didn't have to answer to anybody. And so I felt such a joy when I was outside, but when I was at home and he'd be there, it was so awkward. You can imagine living with your ex for a month and it's a situation where you're not even speaking, or when you do, it's just passive aggressive comments. So when he left in June, I thought, okay, now I'm finally free. But the divorce battle was still going on at home, and I had lost myself in the relationship. I'd also drifted apart from my friends. The relationship wasn't the same. So, who is Connor? Like, what do I like to do now? Why are these parties that were 2 years ago in 2017 so fun, not fun anymore? I need to meet new guys. I need to find new friends. I need to fill my time with going out and just going out and going out and meeting new people and Tinder and Grindr and every app you can get, because I don't want to be lonely. I've felt lonely in the relationship and I don't want to be lonely anymore. So I went down a darker path. Anyone that I could find to go out with, to give me attention, I would gravitate towards. And it just continued this darker and darker path all the way up to COVID. It was a downward spiral to the point where it just became obvious towards everyone, because my residual anger from the relationship and with my father and my insecurity issues started to get projected onto guys, onto my friends, onto everybody. And so it started to affect them, and we all started to drift apart. I started to become not a nice person to be around because I had all this anger and it would come out unexpectedly or when I was wasted. And sometimes I wanted to be wasted to just black out. Like I went to Berlin New Year's just before COVID. I don't remember being there. Like I was blacked out on not just alcohol but benzos too. And let's just throw in antidepressants in there because maybe that'll lift up my mood. No, it doesn't work, clearly. And so I reached an all-time low point by June of 2020 where I wanted to end everything, and I attempted to. I took an overdose of a lot of pills and went to a bridge. I made a goodbye video because I was very into the diaries, and so this diary, I put it all together like a goodbye sort of send off like video of my life to so apologizing to everyone, and so they always had the memories of maybe parts of my life that they hadn't seen. And so I made that video and I thought, that's it. Like I remember releasing it on the way to the bridge, and because I was so wasted, my mom still had my ex's number who managed, I don't know how, like looking back, that managed to get there and find me, but I was such a mess and split in so much shit that I think I did not want to really end things. And that's why I ended up sending, the location where I was. But after that, I ran to the UK for 3 months. As soon as I went back to Madrid, 3 months later, was back in the same cycle. I met someone very toxic in this new friendship group, and I was back on the alcohol, antidepressants, benzos combination. And this guy tried to basically sexually assault me, and no one believed me because I was such a mess. And none of this new group of friends had my best interests at heart. So they basically went on a 2-year hate campaign against me, saying, I had smeared this guy's name and I was a liar and all these different things, and none of it was true, and that I'd done all these things for attention and Munchausen and all these different things. So I had another suicide attempt in November, which I didn't really tell anyone about. And after that, I just felt in a lost place. Like, what do I do with my life? I'd go back to the UK, then return to Madrid. The problems would start again. And it was like, but I'd want to go back to Madrid because I'd be so isolated and lonely in the UK. I'd think I was better when I was in the UK because I was safe with my mom, my sister, my grandma. And then I'd go back to Madrid and the group would start again. And the messages and the hate was every day. How does it feel to be the most hated guy in Madrid? You Munchausen, you liar, you this, all these horrible, abusive messages. When you've got a group of like 8 people all after you saying, we know where you live, we know where you work, because the guy who had tried to sexually assault me had my school email address. So he would make fake accounts on Grindr, pretending to be someone else. So pictures of me he'd threatened to send to the school because I'd referred him while we were friends, because he was trying to get a job. And so they do things like hold that over my head, like threatening me, the blackmail all the time. Maybe we'll show up at your school with the pictures. Maybe we'll show up at Retiro Park, which is the main park in Madrid, to surprise you on your lunch break. We're always watching you. We work in groups. Like, can you imagine the torture it was for me, like dealing with that? And so when I'd be out, I'd be extra wasted. And if I saw any of them from that group with liquid courage, I would be vicious and nasty. And I've had to apologize to those people for my own peace, to move past it, to let it go, because that is not me. And I was in a dark place in my life and I made a lot of mistakes. I messed up a lot of things. I could have handled things a lot differently if I had been able to handle this anger in a different way. At the time, I felt like caged in a corner and that I had to strike out against all these people. So eventually I left Madrid and I had almost a year back in the UK. I moved to Barcelona to sort of test it out last spring, and I found that I was still kind of in the same situation with guys. I hadn't worked on anything. Even though I'd been to therapists in the past, even though I had, tried different ways to get better, I think every time I was in the UK, rather than doing the work, I was just sort of, without anything to trigger you, you can feel like you're healed. I wasn't healed. And what basically happened was that, I moved to Barcelona in the spring, but I was still getting triggered by guys and rejection and feeling like a group would maybe be against me and this paranoia. So I left. I went back to the UK. I thought, take a pause. And then since I moved back officially again, is when I found joy for the first time in the summer. But I found it through a guy. However, finding it through this guy showed me that joy was possible again, even though the situation was never meant to be and it did not work out with him. I hadn't felt joy in so long. So just before I left, um, in the summer, I met this guy, and while I was in England, we built this sort of really happy, like WhatsApp, Instagram. It was like, I felt like he was my boyfriend, but we were never even in a situationship or anything. But I hadn't felt that close and that much laughter and that much joy from someone in so many years. Like, I was happy every day. And anytime the phone would buzz, I'd be like, oh, is it a message from him? And so when I got rejected, and room change. So when I got rejected, it was not like any other rejection. It felt worse than a breakup. Like, if I don't know if any of you have ever felt that before, like that feeling you were never with them, you never dated. I always see this meme go around on Instagram, but it stings so much more because you wonder about the what ifs, and the what ifs in life are those that we always cling on to. You know, people always think, well, what if I'd stayed with that high school boyfriend at 17, for example? Or what if I had flown off to Tokyo at 23, but I didn't? Like, for example, you know, the what ifs, the things that we tend to punish ourselves over the most. And so what I felt was a sense of loss and grief with the rejection from him, because it felt so much deeper, because I'd found joy, but I'd put all that joy onto him. But I'd found joy again. So I was like, okay, I've hit like a new low point coming back to Barcelona. But if I can feel joy again, how can I feel it on my own without having to put it on a man every time? Because that's what I'd always done and seeked validation doing. And so as the months have passed, I've really worked on filling the space. So when I say fill in the space, I mean the space, you know, is that sort of empty part of your life, your day, where you feel like you have to fill it with something. And for me, it was always trying to meet the right guy or go into parties, you know, being heavily involved in the gay scene. And that part of my life, there's still a part that's there. But how about let's fill it with other things that I enjoy? So I really got back into hiking again. And yeah, I've had a few accidents, but that's part of the course. And really just obsessed with music and finding new bands and getting into graphic design and video editing and really getting into, you know, delving into things that I didn't even know that I would enjoy, and really working on becoming a better friend, a better listener, more empathetic, more apologetic to people from my past that I have hurt, and working on being a better brother, a better son, a better friend all around, and a better version of myself. And it's not to say that I do not have bumps in the road along the way. I do. You know, sometimes I have my off days and I don't promise anything to people. I say, look, today could be great, but I could fall off the wagon tomorrow and go to a dark place. But in saying that, I've released the pressure and I don't feel this expectation that I used to put on myself a few years ago when things were in a really dark place. I'd say from 2019 up until the end of last year, I was in a really dark place. And I kept trying to fix it by appearing better or putting on like this, like I'm doing better, but really I wasn't, because I wasn't putting in the work. Now I'm putting in the work, and I've made my life busy and started to fulfill it in other areas. I feel like this podcast also is super helpful for me as an outlet, because it gives me something to really focus on. And with ADHD, having something that you're passionate about, that you can put your all in, you really go all in. So I'm really excited to get guests on. Every week, someone will come on with their story, or a discussion that we'll be having, and it will be great to get points of view and people's diaries from all over the queer community. I think it's so important, and I really felt like in the world of podcasts, like having something that's really raw and authentic, for the queer community, that people got to share their diaries. Let's do it. So, welcome to the Queerness Diaries. Thank you for listening to my first episode. I'm your host, Connor, and we'll be back next week with our very first guest. So, thanks so much.